Very good. So delighted to be meeting with you all today. Thank you for your time. The way we wanted to approach this topic of working with search firms is really kind of clustered around two big areas. We'll get to that in a moment. But before we do that, we're going to talk about why search firms are involved in search and recruitment and these leadership transitions. So Julia, do you want to take the two reasons we do work with
firms? Sure. Absolutely. So the two reasons that we work with a search firm can be really divided into the candidate side and also the search committee side. So at various aspects of your career, you're going to have that overlap where you're actually on the search committee side and you're probably a candidate as well. So we're just going to show you how to optimize that relationship with the search firm. Why do we use search firms? What's the value and utility of the search committee? And how can you optimize your own portfolio as you're the candidate? So we'll walk you through search committee side as well as the candidate side as well. And just a PSA, we want this to be as informative as possible, but also conversational. So please do interrupt. This is scientific seminar style. Jump in with questions, use the chat. David is monitoring the chat. We want to hear your voices as well.
So let's go ahead and get started. So to both of you, so what do search consultants really do? And what's your role in the recruitment and selection process of candidates? If you can go through that for us, that would be great.
Sure, happy to. And we invite audience members to put comments in the chat. We might not be able to get to them in real time, but we'll be tracking them and fold them into the discussion. So a couple of reasons we see in using search firms for leadership change. So the first one is that when you have a major figure in an organization transitioning in, it's a moment of anxiety. It's a moment of opportunity and reflection. So this is, if you zoom out, a chance to really revisit strategy. It's a chance to revisit organization and aspirations. You can also have an entry point to address some tough questions within the organization. Your search consultant will work with the client organization to build a fair process. So you're not relying on first responders or whoever the search committee or the decision maker might know or is trained with. That happens a lot. The idea is creating a fair process with on-ramps for all candidates. Talking about on-ramps, one of the main functions that a search firm does is we recruit. So your best candidates are oftentimes not looking. And it's our job as recruiters to identify compelling candidates, reach out to them and engage in a discussion. Again, not just responding to folks who apply using from an application or from a job posting, but really engaging in a discussion with an individual who might not be looking and making the case for them. Diversity, it's increasingly important, especially in the past 3 years. What we're seeing is that institutions have this moved very, very much to the front of their priority list. We are feeling our way through it, and it is something that as search consultants, we're very much part of this discussion. We can get to that a little later on in this discussion. Relationships are really important, and done right, in my experience, working with candidates and our sources of candidates, folks who develop talent or have mentored a lot of talent, it really becomes a trusting relationship. So we're calling individuals based on recommendations. We're calling folks for the right jobs. And there's a sense of trust when folks give us names as consultants. We're making the sort of thoughtful inquiries to candidates for individuals to really maximize their potential. And lastly, search is complex. The biggest wrinkle that we've seen is what we've all been living through, the pandemic. It has upended our industry. We now have our footing again, but it really has caused all of us to revisit ways that candidates think about their careers, when they think about it, geography, all of those components, and then also a search process and decision-making process.
So Flip, maybe I can ask a couple of questions, if that's okay.
That'd be great.
Interject that. You talked about building a fair process. And so the biggest question I think some of our audience may even have is that, so is this fair process usually designed by the search firm? Or is there an MOU that's signed by the institution who declares what fair process is that hires you? And then what happens if that particular agreement is breached?
Yeah, so I'll take the first part first. Happily, there's a good intention on both sides. So what we do as the search consultants is we'll sit down before any of the recruiting begins and just map out what's the timeline and what's the process. Who gives input, who has decision rights, who do we have to consult with? So that's really clean and clear. The next thing we want to figure out is what are the criteria we're recruiting towards and evaluating candidates against. We want to be really clear on that so you're not making it up. You're not falling in love with candidates based on charisma when it comes to the interview, and so forth. Those are two examples. Breaches, gosh, it doesn't happen that often. What we do see sometimes, though, is that the job itself changes. So there can be an organizational shift or existential crisis that causes the job itself to shift, a big portfolio change. And that's a moment in the search where we as consultants would say, at our best, we're reading this opportunity as different. Our candidates are as well. What does it mean for both of us to succeed here?
And I'll just add in that a fair and equitable process is something that is not set in stone, it's dynamic. And so you have to continuously throughout the search check for that. At the launch meeting at the very beginning, as you evaluate candidates, as you interview candidates, as you talk with your fellow search committee members, you have to make sure at every single step up until the finalist pool and the hire that you're being fair and equitable. One mistake that we see often is, some committees might start with implicit bias training and think, wonderful, we've set a good fair ground for the search, not knowing that there's going to be lots of tensions at every moment in the search where you could derail fairness, and you have to actively work to put the train back on the rails.
So Julie, if I can ask another question
Please,
along that as well, and that is, you talk about your recruit pools, and now there's a big need for recruiting diverse pools. So how do you decide where you look for those candidates to make that diverse pool? Mm-hmm. And what influence you the most?
Yeah, well, I can kick this off, Flip.
Please.
One of the best tactics that I love and I use is the search committee, actually. The search committee, they're not just the decision makers, but they're your portal to diversity. I empower them to send me names. These are your colleagues. This is your field. If you see that there's a dearth of women or folks that are underrepresented in your field, you would know them more than I would. So who are those names? Who are those sources we should be talking to? And then the second thing that I would say is being really, really intentional with where we're looking and building those trust networks. It really takes, I'm going to keep it real, very difficult conversations at times to bring folks into the pool. They want to know, am I quote unquote a diversity candidate? Am I just on your list because I'm a woman? Is this a real search? And so you have to be truthful enough to have those sophisticated conversations to build the trust, because without those, you can recruit diversity into the pool, but you're not going to sustain it. I don't know if you want to add it.
That's perfect.
Okie dokie.
So maybe let's segue into another topic here. Now I'm sure you both have run into, identified what are some kind of best practices or the most effective practices in working with search firm representatives and how to best leverage your expertise. So what can our audience walk away with? How should I work with you? What are some of the best practices that I can learn from?
Yeah, happy to take them through. That's a really good segue because we're going to transition into the search committee. And so, as I mentioned, there's two ways you can work, major ways you can work with a search firm. One is the candidate, you're being recruited. The second is you're part of that decision-making body as a search committee member. Next slide, please. Wonderful. Okay, so when you're working with the search committee, I'll just go through some of the things that you're put on there for. So if you're on the search committee, you're asked to gather information, to really critically ask questions, to maintain fairness, to make sure that you're promoting the integrity of the search, to evaluate the candidates, obviously, and then to decide. Ultimately, it's your decision. We always tell the search committee, this is your search. It's not our search. It's not the president's search. You're the decision-making body along with the folks in the university. And then the second component of this is ensuring civility and professionalism. As Flip said, it's not just, these are the three names from the last search that I'll call. This is my neighbor. This is someone who looks like me. It's building a fair process that ensures that everyone has the same on-ramp to the search. And that's really going to be the cornerstone of diversity of a search. The search can only be as diverse as what you recruit for. And the search committee members are really that junction where you can say, I'm opening those gates to make sure that we have diverse people and that we're taking them seriously. As I already mentioned, it takes active work. It's not static. It takes active work to build inclusive cultures and teams that are actually diverse. And so we see this very often in the search process where, again, we'll introduce diversity, inclusion, equity, allyship, accessibility, all of these really good words at the very beginning of the search. And then by the middle of the search, the implicit biases start coming out. And then by the end of the search, the diverse pool that we started with perhaps has faded. And so my point here is saying that it takes active work. It takes real active work. At every stage of the search, you have to be looking for equity, inclusion, diversity. What are those biases? What are those microaggressions? And that really is the major role of the search committee member. It's not just the decision maker. It's making sure that there's a process that's fair. People and organizations are constantly learning and adapting and improving, and the search committee plays a key role in that. And then, of course, you're engaging in the moments that you need to engage with your fellow peers. Next slide. So, unfortunately, there's a lot of utility to having search committee members, and the backside of that is that we've seen it really all. We've seen insensitive comments, hurtful comments, illegal comments on race, gender, ethnicity, age. And so these are primarily benign, but they're still damaging. A metaphor that I used to use that I like often is whether, a gun is fired from someone who's aiming at you, or if it's an accidental shot, it's still steel moving at a very high velocity, right? So it doesn't really matter. These comments are still damaging. And next slide, please. I'll actually transition. You can think about these comments as hurting four main components: the candidate, the search, the committee, and the institution. So comments that we hear a lot, and if you hear anything like this, please do drop it in the chat. We'd love to talk about it. That's not where the best people train. So introducing biases in terms of institutions. They might judge someone from an HBCU. They might judge someone from a minority serving institution. Someone that's not in the top 20 or top 40 of NIH funding might get judged. And what you're doing is you're effectively making sure that you're cutting out all the diversity of your pool. Another thing that we often hear is, well, we're at the shortlist and we need a diversity candidate. That's a really destructive phrase. First of all, I will go on record and say, no one is a diversity candidate. That does not exist. Diversity refers to a group of people, not one person. Second of all, when you refer to someone as a diversity candidate, although we probably know what you're talking about, what you're doing is undercutting their merit, and you're really just assigning them to the search based on their gender or their skin color, and you're making everything else that they've worked for essentially null and void. You're putting their identity at the forefront as opposed to their merit, and we don't want to do that. She's very talented for a woman candidate, and believe me, Flip and I have heard all of these phrases. They're not just here for the sake of the talk. You'll hear this a lot with ethnicity and race. This person is very talented for a Black scientist. She's talented for a woman CFO. And what that does, it presumes that excellence cannot live in the same realm as that identifier, which is obviously not true. We do want a diverse candidate, but we also want the best and the brightest. Again, thinking that it's exclusive to have diversity with excellence. And that's actually one of the primary areas in a search where I have seen diversity really go awry. We can't include certain institutions. We can't include certain people because we're looking for the best people. And that doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. And then we need an excellent candidate, but a diverse candidate. So again, all these things that presume that you can have excellence and diversity and equity and sitting together in the same room. And I just want to touch on before we move on is that these are really insidious because they hurt not only the candidate, it's not just your individual career that's being hurt here, but the search itself. It really undercuts the equity of the search. If you're going to have a pool that's diverse and yet it's not inclusive or it's not equitable, there's really no point. The search committee, it undermines the integrity and then also the institution as well. As David said, if the institution is hoping to have a fair search, there's really no hope if you're going to have microaggressions like these. And so it's really important to note that you can address these in real time or you can go back. You want to be empowered as a search committee member and say, hey, everyone, I'm glad that we got to a short list, but some conversations made me a little bit uncomfortable. I want to make sure that we're being inclusive. So those are two ways you can address that if you ever hear them.
So Julia, there's a question that's just dying in me that's trying to come
Oh,
out.
please. Please.
And the question is, if the candidate encounters those comments during their interview, should the candidate call them out? What advice do you have?
Yeah, I would say the candidate, my advice, and Flip might think differently, is to go back to the search consultant. It depends on the flavor of it. There's going to be lots of different types. Some things that might harm your candidacy, you might want to correct in real time, elegantly. For example, if you say, oh, well, your institution isn't research intensive. Well, it is research intensive. We have a different research mission, but it is research intensive and I engage in research. That's a subtle way of saying, yes, I'm not top 20 of NIH funding, but we still have excellence for the tier of research that we do. If it's something that you feel is a personal attack or that's going to personally affect your candidacy, I would go to the search consultant. Remember that we are actually conduits in between the candidate, the search committee, and the institution.
Yeah.
We can broach that with the search committee members. We can broach that with the search chair. And that's something that we can easily take care of. And what that also does is it takes some of the pressure off of the candidate and for the candidate having to be the one to bear that onus.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's so many of these that we see. Another one is in an interview, a search committee member might ask, well, candidate who's a woman, how does your husband feel about this? Because he's a very successful neurosurgeon. Is he willing to move as well? And the best, a great response is, well, let's keep it focused on me and my career. There's just all of this sort of layering that's irrelevant and offensive to the candidate when you're thinking about a specific role. And I think there's another side of this. So each one of these bullets, there's someone in the room who these very likely would offend. So we view it as a moment of courage, and we empower committee members to firmly and clearly, but with grace, call someone in. What do you mean by where the best people train? Can you help us understand where those might be? My own personal growth has been having the courage in those moments to not just let the moment pass, to let the search go so we can finish the meeting to catch our flight, but engage those moments. Because if I'm thinking it, almost every single time someone else in the room is thinking about it. And I think by calling it out, we are giving license to the group to say, we're going to focus on the job and we're not going to deal with these microaggressions. They're just not acceptable when considering a role like this.
Yeah, it's really important to note that you don't have to wait for the consultant or the chief equity officer to break that seal. You can be the one, as Flip says, it says, I don't really like how that sounds, or what do you mean by that? Oftentimes, folks will say, if no one else said anything, it may not be wrong, or that means that nothing has happened. Really, the best searches that I've seen, the search committee members all sit around the table and they all feel empowered, every single one of them, to say, these are my questions, not only about the candidate, not only about the search, not only about the institution that they come from, but about ourselves and how we're looking at that. And I truly have seen this at the finalist stage, at the beginning of the search, at the middle of the search. I've seen this change decisions. It really changes decisions. And so by you saying something and being brave, it really, what effectively you're doing is not only changing the search, but you're making sure that the diversity that the search consultants bring can actually perdure.
Yeah. Opening it up to the group, we'd love to hear from you. If you would like to unmute or throw some comments into the chat.
Well, I have a question. My name is Arnold Sia from Louisiana State University. I am the faculty advisor for the LMSA at the university. What are the advantages to have a firm to hire somebody?
Right. So I think there are a number of reasons. The idea is that we're actively recruiting candidates. We can be an honest broker between the candidate and the institution. So in my role as a search consultant, candidates will feel comfortable asking me questions. What's the real deal with fill in the blank that they might not ask the client? And just to stick with that a little bit, it's in my interest to be as honest as possible because this is not transactional. If we do our jobs well, we're working with individuals for a long time and building trust with them. So we want to give as clear a picture as possible to help them make the most informed decision about a role. And we're also advisors. So we will help organizations that it's not every day, they might have a major leadership transition, think about what are the implications of decision A versus decision B? If we have a public finalist stage, what do we have to think about? If we have a private, sort of closed finalist stage, these are the things to think about.
And I'll just add the market feedback is an essential part of that. I can't tell you the amount of searches I've been on where we've had to pivot and we've said, this is what we're hearing from the field. This is what we're hearing from the candidates. This number is not working. They're, afraid that this person is still in this role. The job isn't very well defined. And so when you hire a firm, we're able to collect all that data and give it back to you all so that you can pivot in the search.
Maybe I'll add a third, and that is, remember that most academic medical centers don't use search firms for all positions, right? And the danger there is that it's not uncommon that the leaders within particular departments will really limit their search only to institutions that they think are the best institutions. A lot of that is really drawing from their experiences, their own backgrounds, the institutions they trust that they think are the best. And it really limits their search as opposed to really, if you're going to diversify the pool that you want, one of the advantages of the search firm is they have a much broader reach. And they're also not limited by only this one or two or three institutions that you're looking at. Bringing the search firm in is a huge advantage for that, to really keep the department honest with regards to expanding that search to a much wider audience.
That's just right, David. We use an actual strategy, a research strategy, and it's cross-cutting. It's not just, we'll sometimes engage with institutions and they'll say, we tried doing this search. Here's a short list of names, and those are good people, but I can tell you that you haven't hit institutions, you haven't hit societies, you haven't hit, there's just so much more that you can do. And we actually use a strategy that's cross-cutting to find those folks, right?
Absolutely.
So that's a huge utility as well.
Good. Other questions? Okay, why don't we pivot now to the other ways that you would be interacting with the search firm, and that's you as a candidate. David, do you have some questions to tee us off with?
I think it's a great time now to segue into the people that are listening. What are some of those ways that they can optimize their portfolio in the best way so they can be even more attractive to the institutions that are looking for the best candidates for them as well? What can they do to enhance their executive presence, through your lens of what you know? How can they use you?
Sure, happy to. So a couple of thoughts here. The first is that it's rare that any one candidate for the first time or even the second time ends up in the job. So it oftentimes is a matter of just starting to explore, considering what's out there. And if you are contacted by a search consultant, building relationships with that individual, the team there, and teams at other firms. So take a longer view, think about it in terms of sharing your aspirations with the consultant when they call you. And then getting honest feedback in terms of where they see that your roles or the types of roles that you could compellingly fit. You will be recruited. So the transfer right now of leadership generationally as organizations grow and expand is unprecedented. We see, because of the pandemic, so many retirements that have been put off. Now they're happening. The search world is very, very busy. So the assumption here is that you will get calls. So our advice here is take the call. Understand what the opportunity is. Even if it doesn't really ignite you and you'd like to learn more about, invest the time, be judicious, but invest the time, even practice at the interview to get better at those skills. It is a learned skill to be interviewing. At the same time, ask for feedback from the consultant and really push. Help them don't just say, how did I do, but give them observations and get their reactions to them. I felt like I didn't have a great response on working with trainees. What did you think about that? How would you help me shape that? A consultant really can be a coach in some ways to help you reflect on your experience and improve in discrete ways. I think it is a good idea to ask direct questions about the search. Let's be clear. If you have compensation needs, ask early what they are, or ask early what compensation expectations are, and try to get clarity on those answers. This ties back to a comment a little earlier. Julia spoke to this. We've had plenty of conversations with candidates who just got a feeling there was a sideways comment in a search committee meeting. We gave a few examples of those. Yellow flags go up, red flags go up with the candidate. Raise those with the consultant. Did you experience that? That didn't sit well with me. No one can quibble with what your experience is. So if you give them an observation, I think you're being true to yourself, and take it to the consultant to say, this is a concern of mine. And if it's a concern of the consultant, boy, that's licensed to start raising it with the client. And then I think what you want to do is, if you really don't want a job, don't engage in it. However, if you are interested and you think there's a chance, consider it. There is an opportunity here where you could end up in the position. There's a real chance of that. And we've seen a number of cases where someone really thought it was a long shot, but boy, they were the ideal candidate at the end because of what the client was looking for. And let's say it's the transferable skills that the client really needed and prioritized that individual had. Do you want to take us home with this?
Sure. And so the
So,
last thing.
I have another question, if you don't mind.
Okay.
We have been talking about, in recruitment about diversity. And I believe that diversity, we're talking about the whole thing. There are qualified candidates that are active and some other ones who are passive, right? Candidates. And you mentioned that the firm a role is also to coach us, to try to determine these type of candidates, because probably you cannot look at it, but the firm are in capacity to find out this type of people and tell the institutions what is the profile or background of these individuals.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, so is the question, what is the profile of candidates who are not looking? I didn't quite grasp that.
I don't know what's going on with my profile. So in the case of active candidates, qualified active, there are people who are active and there are people who are passive, right?
Mm-hmm.
So do you detect when you are, searching those type of these individuals? Because it doesn't mean that a passive is not a good candidate and an active is not a bad candidate or something like that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I grasp the question now. I think that the job of a search committee and search consultant is to identify all of the candidates, those who are active or those who are not yet looking, which I read as the non-active candidates in that breakdown, and reach out to them. Because I think you're not doing your job if you're just reaching out to the people who are raising their hands for everything and applying to everything.
Yeah.
The trick, though, is identifying them. So I think this is where thought partnership is great. I mean, we would love to hear ways to sort of find the next generation down. Who are the folks who are up and comers? They might be leading smaller units, but are really accomplishing a lot. They might not be, when you call, I don't know, a dean, or when you call someone in a society and say, who are the, strongest names that you can recommend? A lot of those will be based on relationships, not a thorough survey. So I think the work here is doing as thorough a survey to find the folks who are not looking, who might not be the higher flyers on everybody's list.
Mm-hmm. And that goes back to David's point in terms of the utility of a search firm, because, you want to have an actual strategy to capture both pools of those folks that you mentioned, the people that are actively in the search, the people that are passively in the search, those that aren't looking, but we can convince them just to take a call. So it's the basis of any good search is a really broad and comprehensive strategy. And that's what a good search firm will do. They'll make sure that you're really hitting everyone from all the different quadrants. Any other questions, I invite, please do stop me. Otherwise, I will say a note, the very last note is about confidentiality. That's something you're going to want to make sure that you broach with the search firm and with the consultant. Some searches are closed, for others, the names are discoverable. Sometimes it depends on the state that you're in. For some folks, it's really important for their roles for people not to know that they're engaged in a search, and for others, it's less so. So just making sure that you're asking those questions. Typically, confidentiality will go away at the very end of the search when there is that short list of 3 to 4 names. Any questions, comments, concerns?
We'd love to hear from you. These are great questions so far.
Maybe I can ask one while we're waiting for our audience to think of those. Please either put them on chat, raise your hand, and we'll call on you as well. So thinking about this and as we're tying this up, what do you think are the most common mistakes or career derailers that candidates make that they should avoid?
I can start. I can start with 2. The first one is not jumping in a search when you, as Flip said, should just learn more. A lot of people will think I'm happy in my position. Lots of folks that are recruited that end up taking the job were happy in their position. But sometimes you find this is really compelling. I really relate to this mission. Actually, I can make this work. This isn't actually what I thought at all the job was or what you were going to tell me. So be open, engage in the search. If it's something that you completely don't want to do, that's one thing. But if you have some curiosity, I would learn more. It's all about networking too. The search consultant will know you. You'll then have a profile with the firm. We can call you for sources for other searches. And so I think not actually engaging in the search can be a mistake.
I have to tell you, Julia, that resonated so much because I think what people don't realize, and I didn't realize that, is that when you talk to most people in executive positions, even in positions such as assistant associate deans, the reality is the majority of people are sought out. It's not that they applied and looked at ads and went to conferences and looked at the ad boards, what was going on. The majority you'll find when you talk to them have been recruited, even when they're, as Julia was saying, that they're happy in their job, but they maybe haven't really never thought about looking at what a potential may be there. So put that in the back of your mind because that's really, really important.
I would add derailers is a powerful term. And one thing that I've seen is that the candidate really has to understand what the job is. A lot of these titles can be compelling and exciting and sound weighty, but it is absolutely in the realm rights of the candidate to start asking around. It's not illegal to look for a job, to ask your networks, to ask people at that institution. So this is how they're describing the job. What really is going on and what does this position really have to do every day? I'm going to make it really high level, but let's say you're a very strong researcher, well-funded, and then you get a call for a title that sounds really impressive. But as you learn about it, they really don't value research for the job or a career in discovery. It might be in, say, building out a clinical network. I think thinking carefully about why are they calling me and is this the right path for me and not just joining a pool is absolutely in your rights. And we urge candidates to really think carefully about that for their next move. And think about where do you want to put your energy? So using research as another example, it's oftentimes that a search committee or a client can get taken with someone's funding record, right? This is a high-performing scientist. Role. I think the question
bring another question. The search is done.
Yeah.
The searching committee is going to meet with the candidate. How important is to discuss with the candidate the aspects relevant to the job description?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely incumbent on the search consultant's role to discuss very clearly how the candidate is lining up to this role. I do this. I think I do not do my job if I don't have a clear-eyed discussion with the candidate to say, you might be a step or two away of what they're looking for. However, they loved your accomplishments in X, Y, and Z. We think there's a case there. You might want to speak to how you would sort of compensate for that gap. If as a candidate, you're not getting that from the search consultant, ask for it.
Okay. I think that is very important also.
Good question.
One more derailer I'll say is, and this is a complex one because it can really kind of mere humbleness or humility, but you want to level up for the job you're interviewing for. If you're a division chief going for that chair, you're a chair going for that dean, of course, there's going to be a schism in your experiences and what the search committee is looking for, because you have not done that job before, for the most part. Or if you have, you've done it at a different institution under different circumstances. But when you're interviewing for a job, you really want to take your transferable skills and embody the role. Assume that you're already in that job. Speak as if you are in that job. Speak to the position profile. And don't be, I see folks sometimes that are too stuck in their own role, too stuck in what they do day to day, and they can't be creative and imaginative with that role. So that's something that can really derail
It's kind
folks.
of like having the vision.
Have that vision.
Vision for that next generation
Yeah.
of what you're going to be doing, and present it.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we were talking about derailers as well. What about social media? And we hear all these things about being very careful what you post, whether it's thinking about how the digital platform has just expanded and exploded over years and stuff. Do you have advice for people regarding social media and best practices that they should think about?
What I would say is that just remember, I mean, it sounds commonsensical, but social media is open for everyone. And, when people do searches on you, that will pop up. Even if you have a private profile and you think that it's not trackable, it is trackable. We've heard, I can tell you example on example of kind of negative instances of that, where one of the followers will flag something so that the public is not aware. Someone that is following you can take a screenshot or something like that. Those are kind of that's the dismal side of social media. There's also a really positive side of social media that we don't talk about enough. And that's speaking truth to power.
Yeah.
During the social unrest of 2020,
Yeah.
we were able to build communities. We were able to get out videos. We were able to
Did she freeze just for me or?
points.
Yeah, what's going
Oh,
on?
was there a freeze?
Oh, did I freeze? Oh, I may have frozen.
I cannot see it. Okay.
Can you guys hear and see me now?
I can see you now, but I cannot see the rest of the people.
Huh, okay.
That's
Interesting.
Yeah. Everything is go back to normal. Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah. But so I'll just add that in saying there is a positive side of social media. We tend to think about just the negative, just the punitive aspects of it, but it can really build community and it can really be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. There's a domain of unprofessional, but that is different than having a voice of social justice, for example, what's going on in the world, in a point of view that might not be everyone's point of view, but it's defensible and it has to do with your values.
So that's where I see an advantage of LinkedIn of what you post, because you can post articles that you read, blogs you've written, things that you may not have gotten published, but at least your site represents, people get a really good idea of your expertise in a much rounder way as opposed to just a limited way.
Yes.
And if you use LinkedIn as just one example, it could be that positive advantage for you as well too.
Yeah, and there's a really good comment in the chat. I'm concerned about the truth to power and blurring the lines of professionalism. That's a really excellent point and a really excellent question. And I think it's a very personal one. It's a very personal one. So everyone is taking their journey, particularly given 2020, 2021. I was someone who used to err on the side of thinking that the two really couldn't coexist. And for me, as a Black woman, as a Black scientist, as a Black professional, my life is my work. And I've come to I cannot separate those two. And so I think, as Flip said, as long as it's defensible, it's respectful, your viewpoint is something that is aligned with your values, I would say go for it. Everyone has their personal line for them in terms of what they feel is okay sharing, what they feel is not okay sharing. For me, I was on the very conservative side. And after the actions of 2020, I realized that, I'm not just a Black person when I'm not at work. I'm also a Black person from 9 to 5. And so I'm going to use my voice as well.
And this might be a litmus test as you, as the candidate, evaluate an organization. If they get tied up in knots because of what you might be posting on social media that might have to do with social justice, anything in that domain, it might not be a great fit, or it might not be a place that you're fighting a fight where they would have your back.
David, if I may, I would like to
Please.
expand a little bit more on that. Is that okay?
Please.
Yeah, I'm with you in the sense of especially thinking about my Twitter account, where it has really become a place where not only people can easily see what I'm about. Of course, all my work is on equity and academic medicine. So I own it. I own what I post there, and I own the image that I may represent through that Twitter account. However, I do wonder again about this speaking truth to power and scaring off, if you will, institutions that are not ready, especially when part of the work is critiquing, although you try to be constructive, right? The structural barriers, health disparities, et cetera, and the list goes on and on. But, based on what you just said, maybe that's not the institution that you want to be in and all that, but it does feel like you do not know, right? What the institution is looking at. You don't know if the institution or the search firm or, the committee has already, crossed you off because of, one statement. So I don't know. I try to balance into thinking, okay, maybe I don't go all the way out, which I don't. I think I don't, right? But at the same time, I don't think for any of us, we really know if that plays a role, honestly, because everything in recruitment is, behind closed doors kind of thing.
Well, the one thing I'll say, that's a really excellent perspective. The one thing I will say is that you can own your narrative. And so when you're speaking with a search consultant, you can say, just as you would say, I do equity, I'm a dean for this, I went to this institution. I have an active social media presence. It's really important to me. I believe that the things that I post are defensible. They're based on data. It's a way that I build community. You can own and craft that narrative so that when the search consultant goes back to the search committee, they're not on the defense and they can proactively say that. It's also something that you should feel free to say in an interview. It's not crossing the lines of professionalism if you say, again, I believe in X mission. I use my social media as well as other tools to accomplish that. So it's not taboo. And by you owning that, it makes it seem as if it's not something bad that they're figuring out, but it's something that you're proactively and proudly saying, this is what I do.
Yeah. I'll make an observation. If I could, sorry, was someone else going to jump in?
No, I was just saying thank you for the suggestion. It's a good one.
I think this is such a good point to work a little bit. So I'll make an observation and then a comment. So the observation is, in the past 2 years especially, I have not had not one search that didn't have, for the job criteria, this individual has to help us with building equitable cultures, diverse teams, and a shared sense of sort of justice and belonging. So I think that's what every institution wants to do. Now, how far along they are on the journey, there's wide variation. So with that as a starting point, the take I would have is Julia's comment is really that your sort of social presence is one part of who you are as a person and a leader. So own it, and I liked how you own it. This is just part of who you are and how you will empower teams to build more just teams, to really think about equity writ large. And that's what you're being recruited for, not just for your point of view, but how your point of view can shape an organization.
And I think we do have some time for other questions if need be.
Julia, you're a scientist. You have to tell us what we're looking at.
Oh, yes, of course. This is a migrating cell. So captured with a live cell microscopy. You can see the leading edge, the flat membrane at the top, and the little tail. That's the lagging edge or the trailing edge of the
That's
cell.
scary, Julia.
Is it?
Knowing that they're moving in my brain.
Oh, they're moving. Yeah, they're moving. Yeah.
So I got one last question maybe then.
Sure.
After the pandemic, what we learned from it, a lot of organizations, institutions have moved to video interviewing, and that's kind of a new space for many people. Any advice for everybody regarding that? How do you, about your executive presidents, about how do you prepare for it? Do you have practice sessions that the consultants are going to do with them?
So I'm going to ask for bear with me when I do this, but I think it is so important. So some really basic ones. Watch what's in the background. If you are doing an interview or you're on camera, cut out all distractions. I know me, if I get pinged, I'm tempted to grab it. People can tell if you're looking at other things. Project your voice. I heard a really nice analysis that a neutral reaction reads as negative on video, a positive reaction visually, sort of facially, reads as neutral. So I think you want to think of sort of emphasize your reactions and modes of engagement. Gesture, use your voice, those sorts of things.
Julie, any additional thoughts?
Nothing to add. That was wonderful.
That's good.
Any other last minute questions? So if not, maybe we'll give you 4 minutes back. The important piece here is please don't hesitate to reach out to us as well. Again, my hope is that we covered our objectives, but more importantly, made you walk away with a little bit of a new sense of how to use search firms. Because again, several years ago, it really changed my perception of how to move forward and how to really take advantage of our experts that were with us today. So with that, Julia, Flip, amazing job. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with our folks and give those pearls of wisdom that you've led. And my hope is that we'll be able to think a little bit more and reflect more about this and take it home with us as well too. And audience, thank you for joining us as well. Thank you for the excellent questions and statement that you brought us as well. So
Thank you so much,
Thank you
everyone.
all. It was very
Hey,
important.
thank you. Bye.
Wonderful
Bye.
to see you.
bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.